Good afternoon, class. I thought I'd give a lecture 2 to sort of end our first week here. Keep in mind that Monday is Martin Luther King Day, in case you have a in class or like a person-to-person class. Monday is a holiday, so the colleges will not be open. They will resume normal business hours on Tuesday, so just be mindful of that as we move into later in this week and the beginning of next week. I hope everybody had a chance to read the syllabus. Later today, I'm going to send out a syllabus agreement sheet. Basically, you need to sign it and date it and then email it back to me. And if you do that, I will add 10 additional points to your first quiz grade. So that's basically telling me and telling you that you actually did read the syllabus, you took the time to go through it, because I know in the last video I hit the high notes, and I haven't really received any additional emails about contents in the syllabus. So I'm assuming if y'all read it, it's pretty clear and understandable. Nobody has any big concerns or big questions at this point. So if you can just sign that email or that agreement sheet and email it back to me as quickly as you can, I will give you, the 10 extra credit points on your first quiz. Remember, the first quiz is due Sunday by 11:59. Quiz 2 will be due next Sunday by 11:59, and then essay 1, the final draft, the one that you want me to grade, will be due the following Sunday by 11:59 as well. Keep in mind, I'm having issues in other classes. If you want to send rough drafts of your essays, and I highly suggest and recommend that, it's optional, but it is helpful. It will, for the most part, help your grade, or should help your grade, depending on how many drafts you send to me and how many drafts you send to Smart Thinking. And I will be sending some information about Smart Thinking by the end of the week as well. And, how many sets of eyes you let look at your particular work outside of the class, outside of school, should also be a benefit, especially if they, the people that you are having look at your essays really understand grammar, writing, that type deal. It's always good to have more sets of eyes look at your work. That's generally where you're going to get the better grades, right? It's the difference between that A, that B, that C, that D, and that F. It goes through the whole process, the writing process that we talked briefly about, that I hope you should read the e-text, those pages that I've listed for this week, because it talks a little bit more about that writing process, the brainstorming techniques that goes involved in writing rough drafts that eventually turn into your final draft, the one that you want me to grade. So going back, if you want to send drafts, please make sure that you send them as a Microsoft Word document attachment via email. Don't send anything, don't drop anything in the Dropbox, because the Dropbox is basically going to force my hand to grade it. So if you submit a rough draft, what you meant to be a rough draft in the Dropbox, now it's going to want me to grade it as your final draft, which you probably don't want me to do because it's probably not going to give you that great grade. So what happens is if you do that early on, I can go in there and delete it. The problem is once people start really turning in their final drafts and you do that, it becomes a little dicey because I will, run the risk of deleting everybody that submitted stuff. So then they're going to have to go back and resubmit. So they're going to be mad at me, and eventually, who was that student that did that? They're the ones that really screwed everything up for everybody. So you don't want to be on the brunt end of that. I don't want to have extra work or have to cause people to do extra work, right? My whole motto throughout this class is sort of work smarter, not harder. So try to avoid dropping rough drafts in the final Dropbox as it relates to the essays. The word of the quiz. Be careful of the quizzes. The quizzes are generally timed for 60 minutes. So once you've started, you have 60 minutes to finish. It tells your time. So I can go back on there and see how long it takes. If you go over the time limit, it will sort of shut off. It will close you down. So you want to make sure that you're finishing your quizzes before the 60-minute time limit. There again, I really don't have much luxury to go back and reset and restart and redo because it takes out a lot of time out of my day when I have other classes, other things to grade, other lectures to give. So just be wary of that. And the other thing is to make sure that your computer is really up to date on stuff, because a lot of folks will start taking a quiz and then all of a sudden, well, my computer was updating or it crashed or it shut down. I sympathize with you because I know how that goes. But really, your computer issues are your computer issues. They're not the college computer issues. They're not my computer issues. So unless I can see what's really going on with your computer, I can't help that. So if your computer crashes during the quiz, you might be a little bit out of luck. The good thing, like I said in the first video, is as we go through these 16 weeks, I will drop your lowest quiz grade. So if quiz 1 is one of those that you just didn't do too well on, then that would be the quiz I will drop as it gets closer to May. I can only drop 1. So at a certain point, if you're doing sort of fairly well on all of them, I still need to drop 1 because it's still going to help your grade. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. The quizzes are really not worth a whole lot of your grade, right? 5%. Where that really becomes an issue is when we get closer to May and you're sort of borderline between the B and the A, the C and the B, that type deal. Where the majority of your grade is going to come from your writing assignments. Essays 1 through 6. That's where the bulk of your grade is going to be. So that's why I say you nearly have 2-3 weeks on most essays. We start out really low in the word count and the page count. So, 2 pages, there really shouldn't be any excuse why you can't get 2 pages written and send multiple drafts in the next 2 weeks. If you're having that hard of a time to write 2 pages, then maybe this is not the class for you. Especially since I'm giving everybody the same amount of time and you have access to these videos. If you want to set up something like a private one-on-one tutoring sessions via Teams or Blackboard Collaborate, if you're in Camden or willing to travel to Camden, we can do in-person tutoring. You have the resources and the tools there, and you nearly have 7 days each week to get assignments done. So it's not like I'm not giving you ample time. I am. I'm probably giving you a little bit more than what most instructors would. All right. So today we're really going to look at sort of the two pieces of writing, Only Daughter and Shitty First Drafts, because basically if you're looking for a model narrative, you have a good, creative, professional, A quality model narratives with those two pieces. If you look in your textbook, in your e-text, in the narrative section, there is a student narrative at the end of that particular section of narration. That's another good A quality paper. So you really have three great examples that you can follow that represents good work and a good story and a good piece of writing. So if you can sort of mimic your writing off of those, depending on what your topic is, of course, and how many drafts you start, submitting and sending, chances are you should come up with a pretty decent piece of writing too. The other thing I want to say real quick before we jump in, several students, I guess, haven't really read the syllabus, because within the syllabus it says within the first 3 days of the new semester, students are supposed to contact via email their professor. So if you haven't emailed me yet, please email me, because on Tuesday, if you haven't submitted the first assignment, which would be quiz 1, and if you haven't contacted me, I'm going to mark you as a no-show. Therefore, you're going to be dropped after Tuesday. So please make sure that you do that if you plan on staying in the class. Let's go, and I'm going to stop this right here, and I'm going to pull up something for me to share with you. As we look at these two pieces of writing, which hopefully you've had a chance to read, because there, a couple of your quiz questions come from these two pieces of writing. And I will say the quiz questions for this week and next week, there's no trick questions. If you read your e-text, if you read some of the material that these two pieces of writing on your Blackboard weekly folder, the answers are right in front of your face. So really, there should be no reason why anybody should get less than a 90. I know some folks are doing really well in other classes on the quiz. Some, obviously, you can kind of tell they didn't really read those pages because they sort of rushed through it, and their grade reflects that. But again, if you're not so much worried about the 5%, then that's going to be your that's your prerogative. So let me pull up the Lamont piece and Lamont, and we will talk about that first. And again, I'm not going to read through this verbatim, because again, I know if you're in this class, you know how to read. What I am going to do is sort of hit the high notes, kind of tell you what is going on here, maybe pick out a couple quotes to look at, but really to look at what's really making this a good sort of personal narrative, because we can all kind of relate to what Anne is talking about in this particular piece as it relates to the process of writing first drafts, the process of writing, period. If you look here, there's a little bio of Anne Lamont. This is actually coming from a larger work of hers, Bird by Bird, which was published in 1994, which for some folks, some of y'all might not have been born by then. But I mean, clearly it doesn't really matter unless you want to go back and look at the other chapters if you're interested in this particular writer or not. And again, that's up to you if you are. But it's good to know a little bit about the author's background and where he or she may be coming from. If you look, to give a little bit more context here, Anne Lamott has a fantastic short essay here about lowering the bar by setting out to write shitty first drafts. You write shitty first drafts because you couldn't possibly write a good first draft. And again, if you look, she says this within this particular personal essay. Very few writers really know what they are doing until they have done it. The only way I can get anything written at all is to write really, really shitty first drafts. And, you know, she's right. There's not too many successful writers out there. Good writers. Student writers. Instructors that can write something great the first time around. Shakespeare didn't do it, right? He wrote a lot of sonnets, he wrote a lot of plays. 15th, 16th century in England, they didn't have Wikipedia. They didn't have spell and grammar check or Microsoft Word or Grammarly or any of this other stuff. So they kind of had to read, be able to proofread and edit their own work. And they had to go through multiple drafts to do that. Multiple drafts really mean multiple, not just one, not just two. It could have been 16. It could have been 66. It could have been 154, whatever the case may be. I'm not saying necessarily you have to go through 16 rough drafts in this class. But I would say the first one or two, probably, the first one should be really, really bad. You should expect me to mark it up. You want me to mark it up. You want more markups on the first drafts than you want on the last. Because that shows progress. Shows progress in you as a student, critical, analytical writer and reader. And you should just expect. Writing is a process. It does take time. Good writing takes time. It's like the difference between a good steak and a mediocre steak. Most people don't like to eat grizzly steak. Well, most people don't like to read bad writing. It's just, that's how it is, right? She goes on and says, in the first draft, you write whatever crazy stuff comes into your head. So in a lot of ways, you're just vomiting or throwing up all those ideas that are running and swimming around or whatever they're doing in your head. You're throwing them down, you're writing them down, you're typing them down on that document or on that paper. You're trying to get everything out. You're not necessarily worrying about spelling per se, grammar per se. You're just trying to get stuff down to see what's really going to stick. And what starts to fall off the wall, so to speak, or smear down the page is the stuff you don't really want. You want to keep the stuff that does stick and that you can kind of build upon. She goes on and says, and here again, this is another quote, the first draft is the child's draft, where you let it all pour out and then let it romp all over the place, knowing that no one is going to see it and that you can shape it later. You just let this childlike part of your channel whatever voices and visions come through and onto the page. If one of the characters wants to say, well, so what, Mr. Poopy Pants? You let her. No one is going to see it. If the kid wants to get into really sentimental, weepy, emotional territory, well, let him. Well, she is true in a lot of ways. A lot of times, by the time you really send me a draft, it may not be necessarily your official first draft, right? Because I'm hoping you're going through the motions of doing a little bit of the proofreading and editing on your own before you actually send me something. even though on my end, it would be the first thing that I've seen from you that looks like a essay draft. But at least take the time and the common courtesy and run your paper through the spell and grammar check on your Microsoft Word. Maybe spend a day or so with it and try to proofread and edit on your own. Because I'm hoping a lot of this stuff isn't new, especially if you just recently graduated high school or are still in high school. I'm hoping at some point you have written essays in the past where you had to do rough draft sessions or peer review sessions. Sometimes it helps if you read your essay out loud, right? You can do this, in the privacy of your own room, at home, in your car. You don't have to do it where there's tens and thousands of people around, so to speak. But read it out loud, because sometimes you can catch a lot of your mistakes and a lot of your errors by doing that. And another way that you can get good at proofreading and editing your own work is sort of reading your work backwards. And I don't mean literally read it backwards. I mean start from the end of your essay and read the last paragraph first. You're not necessarily at this point reading to see if it's organized correctly or structured right. You're just looking for surface errors, you're looking for spelling mistakes, you're looking for punctuation issues, you're looking at subject verb agreement problems, dangling and misplaced modifiers, that type stuff. You're trying to weed out what we call surface errors that most K through 12th grade students should be able to identify at this point in their college career. Now, we know, or at least I know, that certain public schools don't really focus on the writing like they should. They have maybe college prep classes, they have the vocational tech classes, they have AP classes. It just seems like in the past that most high schools focus on the reading comprehension, which that is good. You do need to know how to read, because that's a fundamental skill that if you don't know how to do that, you're going to be sort of screwed throughout your lifetime. Just like math, if you don't know how to do basic multiplication, division, subtraction, and addition, then anybody can rip you off on your paycheck and you wouldn't be any smarter to know any different. But writing is also a good communication skill, especially since everything seems to be heading more technology based, email, business memos. I mean, look at how most people get hired these days. It's not like it was 25 years ago where you kind of, if you know somebody, they can kind of give you a good rub, or you can just go into that particular business and ask to speak to the manager, and you sort of have an informal interview there, and based on that, they really determine whether you're hired or fired or hired at that particular point. Now you have to go through the whole painful process sometimes of sitting down in front of a computer and filling out an application and uploading your resume and your cover letter and your thank you letter and all that stuff. And sometimes that takes time to do. But at the same time, you don't know if they're really getting that information, or are they really reading it? Is the stuff that you are sending riddled with grammatical and spelling issues? I've been around, at the education level, where we would get applicants submit their resume and they couldn't spell correctly. They have degrees and they couldn't spell. Now, does that make them stupid? Does that make them dumb? No, it just makes them foolish, because they could have easily corrected a lot of those errors by having somebody help them, proofread their paper, or at the very least, they used Microsoft Word. They could have run that resume through a spell and grammar checker, and they didn't even have the common courtesy to do that. So when you got somebody that's like that, that misses sort of the minor things, which we would think would be minor at the time, is really major, especially when you are applying for a competitive position. They're going to look at that person and say, well, if this person can't spell their boss's name correctly, or if they can't put a comma, you know, where it needs to go in a date or in a month or whatever the case may be, if they're, don't want to be bothered with the little things, why should we hire them when it comes to something that's really big? And they usually will just, it's a common fact. Most people that hire, they look at the resume for about anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute. If they see a lot of spelling and grammatical errors, they just toss it in the trash, move on. They don't have the time to deal with somebody that doesn't want to, proofread their work. Same thing with a cover letter or the thank you letter. They just don't have time for that. They think with somebody that has an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree or a master's or a doctorate degree should know how to spell and use a semicolon correctly. Does that apply to every job? Probably not. But you have to get hired through the resume and the application process. So they're going to see a little bit of your communication and your language skills. And if they don't like what they see, they're going to say, well, I don't know if this person's going to be a good fit, because they're going to have to deal with the general public. And if you can't talk to people and you can't write to people within your company, they're not going to want to hire you. If we go a little bit further, it says some of the crazy stuff won't be so crazy, which is true. Because it's you going through whatever you just slot down on that piece of paper, and you're trying to pick out or cherry pick some of the gems, some of the good ideas that you can work with, that you can develop that next sentence or that next paragraph to, get the process going, to turn one paragraph into a second paragraph, to turn two paragraphs into a page, to turn one page into 3 more pages, that type deal. So Lamont goes on and says, just get it all down on paper, because there may be something great in those 6 crazy pages that you would never have gotten to by more rational, grown-up means. There may be something in the very last line of that very last paragraph on page 6 that you just love. That is so beautiful or wild that you now know what you're supposed to be writing about, more or less, or in what direction you might go. But there was no way to get to this without first getting through the first 5.5 pages. So yes, going back to the whole process, writing does take time. You have to be sort of committed to it. Long go the days where, let's say, just for argument's sake, in high school, we've all done it. We're procrastinators by nature. We put off stuff that we don't like doing until the very last minute. Let's say you had a 2 or 3 page paper due in your 11th grade English class, and you basically, it was due on a Monday, so you spent up, Sunday night about 3 hours just slopping something down, going through various sites on Wikipedia and SparkNotes and putting stuff together. And somehow, because you only spent 3 hours on it, you turn it in the next day and miraculously you got an A- or a B+. A lot of times students take that same mentality and they bring it with them to the college, whether it's a technical college or whether it's a university. The problem with that is that don't always work. And at this particular level, right, English 1101 is that freshman level, college level English class. Chances are, waiting to the last minute to slop stuff down and thinking you're just going to cruise through with a B+, maybe wishful thinking on your part. Especially if that 3 hour paper, your first draft was really your final draft, as it relates to turning it into your high school teacher. And of course, high school teachers, we know they're overwhelmed. They have anywhere from 75 plus students. Generally, most high schools are on block schedules of 90 minutes a day. That's why the whole 5 paragraph essay works really well for them. And they may not focus so much on the grammar as they should, because by the time you get to ninth grade, the deal with grammar is usually they don't really discuss it as much. You may get a little bit of it, you may not get any, because what they're thinking is K through 6th grade, you should have got all the grammar by now, or K through 8th grade, you should have got all the grammar by now. So they're not focusing on that. And when you come to college, when we focus on the whole picture now, we kind of expect that K through 12th grade actually prepared you for English 1101. Just like K through 12th grade should have prepared you for college algebra and all of the freshman level college courses. And what happens is, we know 2 things. I know that the public school didn't really train you properly. That's not necessarily the fault of the public school or the teacher. There's a lot of different variables involved with that. That's not necessarily the fault of you as a student, because let's just face it, when you're in 11th grade, that senioritis kicks in, and you're going to fight the least path of resistance at that point. You're just trying to get out of there. And you think that, well, if I did it in 11th grade and 10th grade and 12th grade and 9th grade and got away with it and passed the class and got a really good GPA, then I can easily just do that at college XYZ. And it really becomes a rude awakening for a lot of students when they get their first grade back on that first essay and it's a C minus, or worse, it's a D or an F. I don't know why I got a 64 on this paper. I did everything that I did in high school. What'd you do in high school? Well, generally I wrote the paper the day before it was due. Well, that's part of the problem. Did you get anybody to look at it? Well, no. I never got anybody to look at my papers in high school, and everything was fine. Well, that's another problem. How many drafts did you write to get to this final draft that I graded? One. Again, that's the problem. You're not going to get a good grade, and I'll go ahead and repeat that. As it relates to this class, you're not going to get a good grade if your first draft becomes your final draft. If you turn that first draft in as your final, you will probably be lucky enough to get a C minus. Chances are it's going to fall in the D and the F range. Just because I know you didn't spend that much time on it if you only wrote one draft and just turned that in. Because again, there's a little bit of sacrifice that has to go into good writing. By the end of this course, will you become the next William Shakespeare? No. That's not necessarily the aim or the goal. The aim of the goal here for this particular course is by the end of 16 weeks, your writing should improve from that first essay. Meaning, as we get closer to the 6th essay toward the end, you're not having to submit as many rough drafts, because you're already finding what works for you, what doesn't work, what kind of errors you've been making in previous papers. You can resolve those issues on your own. I'm hoping by the time we get to the end of the semester, instead of submitting 5, 6, 7 drafts, you might only be having to submit maybe 2 or 3. What you learn in this class as it relates to writing papers, you will take with you and utilize it, I hope, in other classes where you have to write papers, because this is not going to be the first or the last time you're going to have to write a research paper at the college level. This is not going to be the first or the last time you're going to have to write shorter essays at the college level. depending on how far you want to go up, meaning degree-wise, whether you want to get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a doctorate. A lot of these quizzes and test stuff, they go away. They don't care if you know how to really read and comprehend. They don't care if you know how to look up those quiz answers on Quizlet. They're going to look to see how well you can bring a case, argue a case, present a case, prove or disprove something on paper. That's how they're going to grade you. They're going to grade you on how well you can analyze and critically think through your writing. Because again, a lot of times when going back to the whole resume process, that's really their first impression of you is in your writing, because they don't know you from Adam or Eve when they pick that file up or download that file and start reading it. They have a name, and then they have some of your personal information, but they don't know you like a friend would know you or like a parent would know you. They only know you by what you put on that paper. And if you can't style the paper the right way, or you can't format it the right way, or you can't put the stuff, can't follow instructions that need to be in that particular piece of writing, then they're either going to say, hey, we're going to pass on this person, or if it's an instructor, they're going to say, well, this person really just didn't take the time to read the instructions or get help. So, I mean, don't be that way, because I'm giving everybody nearly 2 weeks, 3 weeks to do essay 1. If you need help, you need to ask for it, because I can't read minds, and I don't. So as we go through week 1, week 2, week 3, if I don't get emails, if I don't get phone calls, if I don't get any indication from you, the student, that you are struggling with something, I'm just going to assume that, hey, they must know what they're doing. And don't be shy about it, because, somebody's paying for you to come to college. There's really no reason why you should have to take this class, or any class for that matter, multiple times before you can graduate. I don't think anybody signs up for a course and says, hey, well, I'm going to take the next 16 weeks and get the highest F possible. Nobody thinks that way. So, and your classmates, they're not paying for your tuition. So there's really no stupid question or silly question. If you have a question, I'm sure somebody else is probably thinking it and maybe too shy to actually express it. So please ask. And if I don't know the answer to it, I will work with you to find an answer to it. I'm not afraid to admit I'm human. I make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. So I help you, you help me. We make the whole process of English 1101 a little bit easier on that level. Moving along on this, it says, but even if you know that your job is to write a shitty first draft, it's still hard to get yourself to do it. Yes. Why? Well, it's because we like to procrastinate. We don't really know what we want to write about. Maybe fears of previous English classes where you're afraid of, you just don't like how your writing sounds, how it looks. You shut down. You have maybe panic attacks or anxiety. You have writer's block, so on and so forth. There's a lot of different variables that can happen and go on, and it usually does. Lamont says, I'll sit down at my desk with my notes and try to write the review. Even after I've been doing this for years, panic would set in. So this is a seasonal writer who still has trouble writing something new. And again, that makes us all human, because we all have that situation come up. I have it. I'm sure some of your famous writers that you enjoy, they have it. Again, it's a process. It doesn't come overnight. Um, it takes time to build that craft, to work, to develop, to organize it. It's just something that you can't find a Quizlet to an essay because you are the one that's sort of creating something that's not there yet. You're having to put your words down on paper to make a painting, so to speak. Um, and for a lot of people, it's hard to do because one, we really haven't been trained how to do it maybe properly, and two, there's just so much other distractions in our life these days. Um, you got the internet, you got your cell phone, you got your games, you got your sports, you got your TV, you got your streaming systems, you got your YouTube. There's just so much stuff going on. Jobs, kids, family, life, other classes that, that think about sitting down and starting an essay or something. Sometimes it, seems to be really overwhelming. A lot of times it's just we have too much on our plate and don't realize that we're getting overstuffed until it's too late. Um, and really, where that sort of boils back down to is nobody's really taught you how not to procrastinate, and nobody has taught you properly how to manage your own time. Once you're able to figure out how to manage your own time, things that used to be so difficult in the past will start to become a little bit easier, especially if you use that process that works in the future. So a lot of times it's changing your mindset of how you approach assignments now. It's not that college is really any more difficult. It can be. Again, if you procrastinate and put stuff off to the last minute, of course, it's going to be difficult, and it should be at that point because in a lot of ways, you just set yourself up for a possibility to fail because, I gave you the assignment week 1, and if you wait until week 3 when it's due to really start thinking about it, then that's really on you. That's not on me. That's not, I'm not saying, hey, week 1, Monday, all right, I want you all to write an 8-page paper and it's due in 3 days. I don't do that. I give everybody the same amount of time to do the same amount of work. I don't give you any more work than I think you should need. I try to weed out some of the busy stuff because I don't like the busy work, and only give you the stuff that is required based on the curriculum set out by the college. So, I had to go through English 1101. Yes, it was a drag because, again, I graduated from Glenn Academy. I had college prep classes, AB student. I did really, decent in my English classes at the time. English really wasn't my forte either. I had other plans, what I wanted to do as a career. That changed over time after some soul searching, which I'm sure a lot of folks go through during the first couple years of college. And, I walk into my English 1101 course thinking, hey, this is going to be a piece of cake. I can just, do what I did in 12th grade and I'll still be able to crank out A's and B's on my papers. Well, when I got my first paper back and it was a 40, and I'm sitting there looking at the teacher and asking what the hell happened here, and noticing there was a lot of grammar mistakes and stuff going on. I was like, well, I mean, man, pretty harsh about the grading, aren't you, bud? And at that time, that professor, he didn't really care. He was like, well, you got a lot of grammar issues going on. You got a grammar handbook that you bought. It's time to stick your nose in the book. You either learn it or you don't. Choice is up to you. We offer the course, every semester. If you don't pass it this time, maybe you'll pass it next time. So, I mean, right there was sort of a rude awakening for me because I'm thinking, like, I had college prep classes. Um, this was sort of the structure and the style I was doing in high school to get my A's and B's. Why am I getting 40s and 50s on, why am I failing papers now? And it dawned on me, um, this professor, he wasn't going to be, he's sort of a hard nose. He wasn't going to be too much help. Um, so I kind of had to learn it on my own. I had to go back and kind of relearn what I had to, should have learned, should have got taught on 9th through 12th grade. And it was a pretty difficult first semester as a freshman. Let's just say that. Um, because the college algebra was the same thing. Um, it wasn't like it was anything necessarily different. It was just they didn't grade homework. You had 50 problems a night or something in high school, and they would pick up the homework and give you checks, and that would count as 100. No, my college algebra class, they had four tests and four quizzes, and that was it. That was your grade. They didn't care whether you did the homework or not. Obviously, if you didn't do the homework, you're not going to do too well on the quizzes and the tests. So it's going to show up eventually. And the same thing with the essays. My professor, he's like, well, if you didn't learn the stuff, you're going to either learn it now or you're going to find another. You're either going to come back and retake the class and spend more money again, or you're going to figure out, hey, college might not be for you, and go find a job at McDonald's or something. Kind of blunt, kind of rude, but I kind of get where they're getting at too at some point. Some stages, they just at some point, some of these freshman courses are, give or take, and I hate to say it, they are weed out courses. They only want the serious student there. They don't want somebody that's just going to be playing around and wasting their time. And I mean, you can kind of respect that, looking back. That professor, actually, my English professor, um, as a freshman, I took him again for my 1102 course, which was my sophomore level. And he was a little bit more laid back then, and I could kind of tell why. He only wanted, like the cream of the crop. He didn't want a bunch of, unmotivated people sitting in his class that didn't want to go anywhere in life. And that makes sense. Um, he wanted to help those that wanted to help themselves, and if he saw that, he would, bend over backwards at that point. And trial by fire, that his first English class was that. If he saw you in his second or any of his upper level classes, he knew that, hey, you must be doing something right, or you must have pulled something out there at the last quarter, right? Fourth quarter down, and you got to make a touchdown to win the team or win the score for the team and all that. So, not every professor is that way, but you're going to run into some professors that are sort of that. They're just hard-nosed, old school bats. And it doesn't necessarily mean they don't like you. It's just they have to be that way to everybody in that first freshman level class just to see who they're dealing with. As we move through the Lamont piece, we see at some point here where it says, but you remind yourself no one is going to see it, meaning the draft. All you have to do is write something shitty. And gosh darn it, you are good enough to write something shitty. Because she goes on and says, so I'll start writing without reining myself in. It was almost just typing, just making my fingers move, and the writing would be terrible. I would write a lead paragraph that was a whole page, even though the entire review could only be 3 pages long. And then I'd start writing up descriptions of the food, one dish at a time, bird by bird, and the critics would be sitting on my shoulder commenting like cartoon characters. They'd be pretending to snore or rolling their eyes at my overwrought descriptions. So have fun with your drafts. You don't have to necessarily be in your first draft, all stuffy and academic and, scholarly and formal. We can work that stuff out as you make progress through additional drafts. But really, the goal of that first draft is just to get something down on the damn paper. Don't keep putting it off. You don't have time. Time is not going to be your friend. You may think you have 2 weeks, and you probably do. But the quicker you get that off your shoulder, the quicker you could start sending drafts. And really, at that point, the hard part is getting started and getting that first draft crunk out and rolling. After that, the drafting process is time consuming and it can be kind of a pain. But if you already have something on paper that you can work with, it's a lot better than trying to start something from scratch 2 hours before it's due. She goes on and says, stick with it, finish the shitty first draft, despite the internal critics that are telling you probably accurately that it's shit. Yeah, we're all are our worst critic. We all have self-doubt. We all think that, I don't like what I'm saying here. So the tendency is, and we've all done it, is you write that first sentence. It sounds pretty good at the time as you're writing. You might write a couple more sentences after that, then you stop and kind of read it and go back through 2 or 3 sentences, and then you're like, I don't really like this. And then you might start writing a little bit more. Before you know it, you're about half a page through. You stop, you kind of read it again. You may go get a drink of coffee, get up, stretch, do some jumping jacks, whatever the case may be. And then you come back to it and you're like, I don't like this at all. This is just wrong. It really is pretty crappy. And you either delete it if you're just going from, typing it, or you take your piece of paper and you rip it, you pull it up, and you throw it away. And you might do that about a half a dozen times. And you look at the clock and you say, well, I started this at 10 o'clock in the morning, and here it is, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I still haven't got past page 1 yet. Because you're constantly doubting yourself. Is he going to like it? Is she going to like it? Is this good? Am I doing it right? You get to the point where you psych yourself out that there's no other choice but to delete it or rip it up and start over. And sometimes that's a bad idea to do, because again, the process is just get everything down, then you can go back and start crossing out. Or another way that you can kind of do things is, if you write your essay out, right, you write it in paragraph form, of course, take scissors and cut out your paragraphs and maybe number them on the back, like paragraph 1, paragraph 2. And you might be able to sort of create your own essay jigsaw puzzle, because your first paragraph may not necessarily be the best position for that first paragraph. Paragraph 1 really may need to be paragraph 4. So you can kind of, if you have it all cut out, you can kind of move it around on your desk and put the stuff where it needs to go. Because if you rip it up and throw it away and somebody comes and gets the trash and they take it out, well, you might have had a pretty good idea going there. You just didn't know it at the time, but now it's down the street somewhere in the garbage and you just lost it. Or if you deleted it, well, if you didn't save it, you're not going to be able to retrieve it. So now that's lost. So be careful and don't throw anything away when it relates to your writing. At least not until you get to the point where, hey, I can really 100% decide that I don't need to use this, or you wait until the very end when you turn in that final draft, then you can start eliminating some of the clutter that's around your desk, because too much clutter can be bad too. At the end, right after you start getting those first draft put together, whatever, you did it, congratulate yourself somehow, and then come back to it later, right? Just get something down. she will go on to say the whole thing would be so long and incoherent and hideous that for the rest of the day I would obsess of getting creamed by a car before I could write a decent second draft. So again, she's being ironic and she's being sort of satirical here. Nobody really wants to go out and get run over by a car, but she's getting to the point where it's that internal critic. I can't go any further. What I have down on paper just doesn't flow right. And I would rather just go out and have a car run me over than to try to do a decent next draft. But sometimes if you give yourself enough time, write it out, take a day, take a couple hours, walk away. The problem is too, when it comes to our writing, we get sort of sensitive to it because it's like a possession. It's ours. In some ways, we've birthed this particular piece of fiction or nonfiction. So besides the internal criticisms, our own head talking to us, when we have feedback from other folks, we don't realize that they're, for the most part, most people are trying to be positive and constructive with their feedback. But as a writer, when we get their criticisms and when we get the feedback in the paper, there's 50 comments on the first page. At that point, we want to break down. We want to get mad. We want to get sad. We may want to cry. We may want to argue. We may want to, we go through all the range of the emotions. And we come back and say, well, it's not me, it's them. They just don't understand it. They don't understand me. They kind of make every excuse under the book. And, that's really the wrong way to approach it. Because no, when I provide feedback, it's positive. I try to make it as constructive as possible. I know sometimes that gets lost in translation when we're dealing with email and the online aspect of it, because everything that we have to do when you're taking a 100% online course is, our communication is back and forth through email and that type stuff. So a lot of times folks will look at my comments and say, well, man, he was kind of rude or, harsh there. And no, I'm not trying to be rude or harsh there. I'm trying to make your piece of writing benefit you, to get your best out of that piece of writing, to get the best possible grade that you can earn and that you deserve. So when you get a draft back and it's loaded up with comments, expect it. You want that. I would want that as a student, because that's telling me, one, the instructor cared enough. He said he was going to read these rough drafts. He has, obviously, because he's marked the damn thing up. Yeah, maybe I did take a couple days or a couple weeks to write it. And that's the thing. A lot of times folks will put the hours and the days that they took, the stress and the anxiety and the ability to actually sit down and type and write something up and say, well, if I spend 4 days, 3 hours a day on this piece of writing, it has to give me an A because I spent 4 days and 3 hours of each of those 4 days. I spent a lot of time on it. So the more time, because he's basically saying, well, if he gave me 3 weeks, I should spend, at least a week or so on it, and then that would give me the A. And sometimes that's not always the case, because, somebody can spend, 2 weeks on a piece of writing and still get the same amount of comments that you did in 4 days. So, and that's the process of writing. A lot of it is coming into this class. If you're already a good or decent writer, maybe you won't have to do as many drafts or sit down with it and spend as much time on it as somebody that's been out of school for 25 years. So just because you spent time on something really long and you did it each day doesn't always guarantee that that first draft is going to give you the results that, well, I spent 75 hours on it, I should at least get an A. That's a wrong way to look at it. It's, yes, it's like a job, but it's different, right? When you go to job, when you go to your work, it's more of a physical labor type deal. You're dealing with people on a daily basis. If you work 75 hours, you're probably getting overtime, you get a bigger check. And I think that's where a lot of folks, they try to equate the two, and they're different. Because writing is more of a mental deal. It's more of a mental exercise. It's a mental workout. And they think if they exhaust themselves mentally, it's the same as exhausting themselves physically. So they should get confiscated, for those hours somehow in getting, well, I should guarantee us, I spent 80 hours on this paper, I should at least get a, 95. And then when they get it back and they get a 75, they want to take it out on the instructor. Well, this guy here, well, I mean, if that's your first draft and you didn't get any help on it, then it's not going to be any good, right? She would then say, after, she gave herself some time, a day or so, it says the next day I'd sit down, go through it all with a colored pen, take out everything I possibly could, find a new lead somewhere on the second page, figure out a kicky place to end it, and then write a second draft. It would always turn out fine, sometimes even funny and weird and helpful. I'd go over it one more time and then mail it in. And then, the cycle will repeat again next time, but that's okay. That's the process. Almost all good writing begins with terrible first efforts. You need to start somewhere. Start by getting something, anything down on paper. And that's basically what her piece is in a nutshell. Now, if we switch gears, and I know we're kind of running a little bit lengthy on this. If we look at the only daughter piece, there's a lot of interesting things going on here. One is that, besides, if you're going to compare the two, the Lamont piece to Sandra's piece here, you're going to note that Sandra deals a lot with the dialogue. She has characters speaking, excuse me, throughout her piece. So that's fine. If you want to add characters, if you want to add dialogue, there is a certain way that you want to do that. And I can help you if you send me drafts of that, because it's a certain way that you need to style it. She doesn't style it how you should really do it as it relates to like an academic essay, but we can work that out as I start seeing those drafts if there's dialogue in it. You don't have to put characters in your particular narrative, but sometimes if you get stuck on page one, like any good TV show or, novel or movie, characters keep the plot moving forward. It keeps it going from point A to point B to point C. So utilize characters that will help do that. Being that your paper only needs to be 2 pages, you don't need to have a Shakespearean play where you have 85 characters, 75 of them die, the other 80 or the other 15, who knows what happens to them. But you want to be careful, because we're not writing a screenplay, we're not writing a play here. So I don't want to see, 2 pages of nothing but dialogue either, because we're not writing a play. So just be, cognizant of that. I would say, obviously you're one particular character because the narrative is going to be about you. But if you want to include mom or dad or a brother or a sister, you can. Animals can be characters. Animals can, depending on how you set up and structure this, you can make it, nonfiction or fiction. I'm not going to fact check, every single thing that you say, because again, I don't have the time. As long as it fits the parameters, it's in the MLA format. The spelling and the grammar is correct. You double space, you indent your paragraphs, you have the 500 words or 2 pages. It tells a story. It either informs or entertains. Then you should be on a really good path. That's up to you if you want to do the whole deal with the characters. Really looking at only daughter, you probably want to focus on and I'm going to share this now, the little plot diagram like most stories would have, right? They would have the exposition, which is sort of like the introduction. They would have the rising action. Then you have this sort of climax. You have the falling action, and then you have a resolution. Most good narrative pieces also have this crisis or this conflict. There's something going on there that will make your particular piece of writing interesting to your audience, because the whole deal is you want to hook your audience. In this case, you want to hook me right off into that, really that first sentence that leads into that first, body paragraph with your thesis statement and all that stuff. So if you look here, the whole narrative diagram to only daughter is that, at the beginning, she's the only daughter in a family of 6 sons. This is Chicago, Illinois, and then it's early 20th century. A little later in her particular essay, we get to more of this rising action that goes along with this plot. The protagonist, which is the daughter, it's Sandra, is trying to be accepted by her own father. Well, again, her father goes through most of this essay talking about he has 7 sons. He didn't want to have necessarily a daughter. He wanted to have another son. So that's sort of the conflict. She is the daughter. She wants to be accepted. She wants to be loved. She doesn't want to be treated sort of as this foreign entity that I'm the only girl besides my mother in the family. My father spends more time with the boys, with my brothers, than he does with me. We can't really click or relate to anything. And she spends a good bit of that time in that rising action getting to that climax where she's working through that conflict or that crisis. There's a problem there that she's trying to solve. As we move up this little graph, we see the climax, right? Her work starts paying off, right? She starts writing more. She starts getting more feedback on her writing. Stuff starts to get published a little bit more. She starts to see that she's found her calling in life. Proves she is more than just a wife. So again, you think in Chicago, early 20th century, she's in this Mexican-American family where the males of that family are supposed to be the breadwinners, are supposed to go out and, get the hard trade works, construction, HVAC, that type stuff. And her father has this old school mentality, and a lot of it is their culture. Because anybody that knows Mexican culture, they see, they still have that old guard where the woman should, either be a wife, should be a childbearer, and should be a cook and cleaner. They don't really see, or at least her father at the time don't really see the value of a girl going out and trying to make her own path in the world, especially being a writer. What is that? If we look at the falling action after sort of that turning point in her life and her career, because again, that's the climax is sort of the turning point of your narrative. It's where we start to see maybe some resolution. We quickly are going to the end of this particular essay or this story. And with the falling action, her father eventually reads some of her own writing and really starts to show his affection. He becomes proud of her. At that point, she's like, wow, I finally was able to get my father to basically turn his head and really acknowledge me now for my accomplishments, more than just being a homemaker or a childbearer or a wife. I have talent. I have potential. Other people are taking notice of that talent and potential. And now my biggest critic, my father, is taking notice of my talent and my potential. And I have value that he may have never thought otherwise, because he was so closed-minded in his own mind about what women, Mexican women, should do in the early 20th century with their life. So we get to the end of this particular essay, and it sort of ends on a high note. It's a happy ending, I guess you could say, because Sandra is finally happy that her father finally accepts her as a person, as a writer, as a daughter. She proved to him that she is not just a wife. There's more to her than just being somebody that stays home and cleans, cooks, and has kids. She went on to be successful with her writing. She's written short stories, essays, poems, novels, and she's made a career out of it. She's making money, she's making a living out of something she enjoys doing. And she eventually and finally was able to solve her conflict or her crisis by getting her father to acknowledge his own daughter as something more than just a typical Mexican American housewife. So when we look at your own particular essay, you want to sort of keep this plot structure in mind as you go through your 2 pages. Exposition, a rising action, a climax, a falling action, a resolution. You have some kind of crisis or conflict or problem going on. Now, your ending can be happy, it could be sad, it could be closed-ended, meaning everything sort of wraps up there at the end, or it can be sort of open-ended, where you sort of leave your audience wondering really what is the ending, what would happen. Your audience sort of becomes the audience at that point, or the reader at that point, if it's an open-ending story or essay, if it ends that way, they can sort of speculate their own particular ending for it. Right? There's not really a right or wrong answer. Her ending is, for the most part, closed-ended here, because she was able to put a bow on everything. She was able to get a career, be a Mexican woman, which again, that's probably, that's against her a little bit. And then she was able to really win the love and affection of her father. She was no longer looked as the 7th son that he didn't have. She was now a daughter that he's glad that he has, because he sees the value in what she does. And he, he's changed as a character over time. So as we get older, a lot of things that we believed when we were younger sometimes change. We don't necessarily think that way anymore. because we mature, we educate ourselves, we get informed, we know better. So that really makes a good narrative too, when you have people that changed over time. And she's changed too. Uh, Over the course of that particular essay, she realizes in a lot of ways why her father viewed her and viewed really women in general in the early 20th century the way that he did, because he didn't know too many women writers. His sons were not writers. His wife was not a writer. His grandma and his mom were not writers. They were homemakers. Um, that was their task. That was their duty. They didn't. It was sort of the status quo of the time, um, to be that. So she came along, and she sort of became a trailblazer to some aspects for other Mexican American women who said, "Hey, I want to be just like Sandra. I want to write. I don't necessarily want to be somebody's quote unquote slave for the rest of my life. There's more to life than just cook, clean, and create kids. You can have that, but you can also have a career and be successful at both." I know I went a little bit too long, I guess, with this, but I hope this is helpful. Clearly, you can, once it's uploaded, you can kind of pause it and stop it and, fast forward, rewind, whatever the case may be, as many times as you want. Both the lecture 1 and lecture 2 is going to be up until Sunday, and then they're going to go away next week because I'm not going to be here on Monday. I will probably do at least one lecture video. I may try to send out a live lecture thing, basically where I invite everybody who can make it, and it's more or less going to be less me giving any additional instruction per se, because we're still on the narrative unit. But it's going to be a chance that if you can make it, that you can kind of talk to me live. If you have any questions, we can sort of do like a Q&A more so, or it's more or less like a virtual tutoring session. If you can make it, great. You don't necessarily have to stay the whole time. If you just have a couple quick questions, you can ask those, and we can answer, and you can go. If you're pressed for time, that's fine. I'm here to help you. That's why these lecture meetings and stuff are not they're not mandatory. You don't have to attend. Usually I try to record them, and they usually stay up for about 5 to 7 day period. But yeah, it will be great if you can attend some of them, because again, otherwise, the whole deal with emailing back and forth, sometimes that becomes frustrating to you as the student, because you know what you need help with, and sometimes it's better to verbalize that than it is to always write it and send an email and that type stuff. And I understand that too. All right, enough from me. I hope everybody had a great week 1. I hope your week 2 is even better. And just email me drafts, email me your questions. Have a great long weekend. Enjoy it, because it's the last holiday that we're going to have, or any break off, until the first week of April when we have spring break. So we got a long stretch after Monday. We're here the whole month of February, the rest of January, the whole month of March. And then after spring break, we have about 3 weeks left, and then our semester is over. So with that, be safe. watch the weather. It says that we have some really colder weather, possibly, well, it's going to be really wet and rainy, I think, Sunday and Monday. But, further into middle Georgia, North Georgia, you might see snow or sleet. So just be mindful where you're at. If you don't, a lot of folks in the South don't know how to drive in snow and sleet, and you don't want to total a vehicle if that happens to you. All right, I will cut it off there. I hope everybody has a great Wednesday night, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Thanks.